Welcome to the latest edition of our Talk Death video series, where you get the chance to ask experts your questions about all things death and dying.
Reminder to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to follow us on Instagram at TalkDeath Daily for your daily dose of death positivity.
Today's guest is Cassandra Yonder, a fellow Canadian advocating for community-centered death care. Cassandra wants to encourage cultural re-engagement with dying, death care, and grief.
Cassandra runs one of the largest Facebook groups dedicated to alternative death care practices, as well as deathcaring.ca, a virtual school for community death caring. Check out the description below to learn more about Cassandra and deathcaring.ca.
Welcome, Cassandra.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So to start things off, we wanted to maybe learn more about what community-centered death care practices really is. If you can give us, a bit of a definition of that.
Yeah, okay. So to get started, I often use the analogy of the slow food movement to talk about community-based death caring, because to me, the sort of easiest way into understanding, I think, what this is all about is to imagine what we go through when we go to grocery stores these days and we're shopping for food. And for example, we're in the meat aisle and we see all of these sort of slabs of flesh wrapped in cellophane. And I think the average person just has a really unsettled feeling in that moment. They're looking at that thinking, gosh, do my kids even know that pork comes from a pig and beef comes from a cow anymore? We're so removed from what that is. And I think that a lot of people also have a sense that some process that they don't believe in happened in order for that meat to get there, that it was unethical, that maybe the animals were treated badly. And so I think therefore that unsettled feeling, which I would call getting in touch with a sense of alienation about our food. I think people are feeling like, wow, my grandparents knew what this was. They did it on their own farm. They knew how to do it. And now it's so many layers removed that it just feels creepy all over. And so I think by the very same token that the way that we're experiencing death care these days in our society, culturally, is that we kind of have this same sense of creepiness, this same awareness of our alienation. And I feel like the movement then is collectively all of these different responses as to how to reclaim death caring. So if you look at sort of the end of life end, I think we realize, oh my gosh, we're putting our elderly away in institutions and not visiting them and not knowing them and not caring for them, not wiping their bums and feeding them the way that we know that our family used to do. And by the same token, at funerals, people are having this experience of going and seeing their loved one sort of laid out in a way that maybe they can't relate to, and they don't know what to do at the funeral. And so those sort of feelings of alienation, I think, are causing a movement that makes us want to reconnect with death caring. And so when I say community death care, what I mean is that the community is actually reclaiming the care of their own dying, dead, and bereaved. But I mean, that's the way I came to it, because I'm a homesteader and I have a desire to live in a self-sufficient, self-reliant way. And so when my neighbor died, it just seemed ordinary. It seemed like a natural response to sort of gather as a community and care for him ourselves. And so the same way that people are reclaiming the production of their own food by growing gardens in their backyard, I think in the same way people are reclaiming death care in communities by having their own, however someone defines a community or a family, by doing it themselves. And that doesn't always mean, as I'm sure we'll talk about more, it doesn't always mean doing every piece of it ourselves, but it means this philosophy of reclaiming.
And so how does your Beyond Yonder virtual school teach people to proactively reclaim death care?
The school came about at a time when the movement was really burgeoning. I mean, and of course it still is, and it's still sort of new, ironically, old practices, yet new again. And I kind of just came to a point in time where I was getting so many calls from people wanting to know how to do this in their own families, for their loved ones, and how to do it also possibly to the public for pay. And at the same time, I knew all of these amazing people across Canada that had sort of carved out their expertise in what I would say was really different aspects of this. And so because I see community death care as such a broad umbrella under which all different kinds of death caring practices can happen, what we did in the school was then to break it up into 10 different modules. So we have a different teacher teach each week and teach something different. So we go through the first model, for example, is being in service to others. So we're really looking at how do you hold space or how do you show up and be present for someone else, whether that's your own family, what baggage are we bringing, or whether that's, to the public for pay, who are we showing up as? So then it just kind of goes through all these different modules, which are sort of chronological in terms of, thinking about advanced planning and what kind of plans are we making when we think of ourselves, that we're actually not immortal. How do we kind of bring that into our lives and how do we live our lives because of it, and plan for the future. And things like advanced planning, people show up for the week. Usually when you say advanced planning to people immediately jump to a medical advanced directive. And so they think, wow, what could you learn about for a whole week about advanced planning? But that medical directive is just one teeny tiny little piece of the iceberg. So for a week, we look at advanced planning and how to facilitate that for others. And then it just goes through a lot of different pieces. We look at funeral alternatives and home funerals. We look at body care. The module that I teach is on disposition. And there's a lot of people that are sort of making more information available to the public about disposition options, which I know you guys have covered in some of your amazing videos. But I look at it more from a philosophical perspective and look at what do our human remains mean to us, and what do they mean to our loved ones? What do they mean to our culture? So it just kind of goes through over a 10-week period and looks at all different facets. And people come out, I think, feeling really capable to show up for their own family. And I think capable to show up in their own communities to just broach this subject. Like the work that we're all doing in this movement is just to be able to say the word dead. Like some people are asking me in the course, they say, oh, I've been asked to give a public presentation. What am I going to say? I don't know enough yet. And I always say, honestly, at this point in time, it's enough to stand up in front of a room full of people and use the words died, dead, death, dying.
Right.
Because the euphemisms, I think, are just a symbol of how alienated we've become. And so all the different ways that we can bring this conversation back. And then at the end of the program, I think some people go on to make some kind of a public practice out of it. There's a lot going on in the field in terms of all the different titles, who are death doulas, what are death midwives, and that's all in flux. We can talk about that more if you want. But in our school, we're really just looking at this practice of reclaiming death care. How does an individual reclaim that for them? Like, what does it look like for this person and this person and this person? It's unique. It's kind of like a yoga practice. It's not sort of spitting out at the end someone that has these really specific credentials or capacities. It's more about this opportunity for self-reflection and self-growth and development, to be able to look at, like, what is my death caring practice and how do I take that out into the world and be of service in my own family and community.